Welcome to the Gifts for Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts for God's glory. Know someone who is making an impact for God's kingdom using their gifts, talents, and passions? We'd love to meet them. Send us an email at podcast@giftsforglory.com. That's podcast@gifts4glory.com. And now here is our host, Dave Ebert.
Hello, friends and neighbors. Happy New Year, and welcome to the Gifts for Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts for God's glory. We're doing something different to get this year started. We're going to have a different theme for the next couple of months. For January 2021, our theme is Hope Through Laughter. We're featuring amazing and funny men and women of God to tell their stories, share some laughs, and share the hope of Jesus, no matter what the world throws at us. But before we jump in, let's get on to our Devotions with Dave segment. We're going to read from Proverbs 17:22, a very fitting passage for this series. Proverbs 17:22 out of the NLT, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit saps a person's strength." And when we have a cheerful heart, it reflects on us in the form of a smile, and sometimes it even overflows into laughter. A cheerful heart, a heart of joy and love and laughter, it's good medicine. It lifts us up. It lifts those around us up. Laughter is truly a gift from God's hand. Study after study shows how beneficial laughter is for our bodies and for our minds. And for the Christian, we also know that if it's that good for our bodies and minds, it can also be just as good for our souls, especially when the laughter is pure and clean and it's not vindictive or abusing the gift of laughter, which so many do in our world today. But laughter truly does. It releases stress, it eases anxiety, it lowers blood pressure, relaxes tense muscles, releases endorphins in the body. It is literally good medicine. And as we start this year, I want to encourage you, keep your eyes on what brings you joy. Keep your eyes on Jesus, on the Father, on the power of the Holy Spirit, on the blessings, and not the possessions, not the money necessarily that He has given, He has provided, but on the blessings that you can't quantify. The love in your life, the family you have, the friends that surround you, the freedom from those things that bogged you down before Christ had freed you. Look at those blessings and let your heart's joy overflow, even to laughter. The Bible also tells us to delight in the Lord, and He will give us the desires of our heart. Delight. We don't use that word very much unless we're quoting this verse. When is the last time you took a moment and just delighted in the goodness and the love and mercy of our Lord, our God? Can't remember? Can you honestly say that you ever have? Well, whether you have or not, take a moment. Be intentional. Go and seek that. Delight in the Lord. Find that joy. Find that overflowing joy that can turn into laughter. Laughter is truly a gift from God. And I often cite this quote, and I think it has such value. Michael Jr., he's a phenomenal comedian and now breaking into acting. He gave an interview where he said, "Laughter is the tangible evidence of hope." I love that quote. I love that God gave us this gift. And I pray that you will find those moments to laugh, to release the tensions and burdens, and reveal that tangible evidence that you have a hope that will never be shaken and it will never be destroyed, because your hope is rooted in Jesus. So I hope that verse speaks to you as we get out of what has undoubtedly been a trying year in 2020. I know that many of us have experienced some really great things that came out of 2020, but I also know that it was a very challenging year, mentally, financially, physically, emotionally. So just remember, find your joy in Jesus, and remember that a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit saps a person's strength. Proverbs 17:22. And that was today's Devotions with Dave segment. So let's get on to our conversation. As many of you know, Gifts for Glory Ministries has an improv comedy ministry team, Well-Versed Comedy. And on a whim, we asked for permission to open for our guest at a show last February. We were accepted, and it was our biggest crowd to date, and it was the biggest blessing of my personal career, and it was also the biggest opportunity for our team, Well-Versed Comedy. It was just a chance to share the joy, the light, and the laughter that God has given us. And it was truly a blessing to share the stage with this well-known, internationally known comedian. He's all over the place. He's got his own podcast. It's called Hook, Line, and Smiley, which is co-hosted by his wife, Sarah. And the two of them just recently celebrated their second anniversary. So happy anniversary to Bob and Sarah. 2 years going strong. He is also the author of Average Boy, which is a book for kids, and that's produced by Focus on the Family. He's also got the Average Boy podcast. All that information is in our show notes on how you can link to that. He's been a comedian for over 23 years. He's also got a Dry Bar special. So for those of you that have the Dry Bar app on your phone, be sure to check out Tartar Terrorist in your Dry Bar app. Incredibly funny special by an incredibly funny man. He's got a great testimony. In fact, he's got two testimonies. We're going to talk about comedy, about faith, and talk about the darkest moments of his life and the life of his three boys as they went through a very, very painful and dark period, but how God got him through it and how God is redeeming all that lost time currently through his new blended family. So I'm truly excited to share this conversation with you. And for those of you that aren't aware of this man, I hope that you'll find him on social media. You'll check out his Dry Bar special and support him in any way you can. He's incredibly funny. He's incredibly gifted. And he's even more than that, he's a wonderful man of God, and I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Bob Smiley on the Gifts for Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts for God's glory.
But I was very excited because I love, God did create comedy. Pastor David is so right. Like, I actually read an article one time that laughter is 10 times more powerful than morphine, than our strongest drug. And God just gave that to us for free. Like, how cool is, don't get me wrong, I'm glad God still made morphine. Let's be honest, if I break my leg in half, I don't want my doctor standing over me going, knock, knock, right?
We are now joined by world-renowned comedian, amazing funny guy. He's also an author who works on Focus on the Family's Average Boy. You want to make sure to pick that up as well, especially if you have kids or if you're just really looking for something fun to do. Bob Smiley, welcome to the Gifts for Glory podcast.
So all that stuff that we said before is not on the show. Like, I've never bared my soul like that. And I don't know where that song came from, that hymn. But like I rarely cry like that. But so none of that's going to be on here. Like, no. Oh, okay. Well, thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
It's another huge favor that you've done for me, because last February, right before the world ended, my comedy team was able to open for you in Tinley Park, Illinois. And that was a huge blessing to share some time with you there, and to do it again here to open up the new year, which will hopefully be a lot better. It's an honor to have you and to be able to share some time with you.
Yeah, I love doing stand-up, but it gets really fun when you have somebody else there that's kind of a band of brothers. Mm-hmm. Where you're doing stand-up or making people laugh or anything that is kind of, you have a commonality with one another. And so, yeah, that was a fun night. That was really cool. Is that what you told me to say? I forgot. I can't find the notes.
Yeah, that was actually very close. I was okay. I was actually glad you didn't look at the old note, which said that something about, we set the bar so low, it made your show better.
Yeah, I remember you guys getting off stage and me coming out and saying, yeah, now let me show you how it's supposed to be done. No, that's not true at all. That's not true at all.
So, Bob, as I was preparing for the new year, I wanted to have you on and hope to, and I'm kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit on podcasting. I wanted to record with you before the holidays took off. So we were going to record actually in early November, but you had a little bit of a scare. So tell us, how's the jaw healing? Is there any scarring? Can you update us on the surgery?
Totally healed. Yeah, I had something you don't really hear about very much called cancer. And it was, I'm a redhead. So if I don't put mayonnaise on my body before I go outside, like I quickly do an impression of a blood blister. Oh. And so I had something on my nose about 7 years ago, and it just never would heal. And so I went to a dermatologist, and they were like, yeah, we think it's skin cancer. And they were like, we'll just chop it off. Like it's just like moving a little bit of skin. You'll be fine. And I was like, oh, okay. So like, I'm a comedian, and which was insulting that I even had to tell him. He should have known. Right. He looked like he had been around for a while. And that sounds so cocky, but That's what popped in my brain. But I was like, yeah, so it's no big deal. And it was like, yeah, we put a little patch on it and then you're good to go. So I was getting ready to leave tour with Tim Hawkins, this up and coming comedian guy.
Yeah.
And so I went in, I had surgery the day before I left for tour, and we were doing, I think, like 5 or 6 shows in a row. And they came in, first of all, it took like 4 hours. And I got out and they had cut all of my nose, and they had placed, the only way I can make people understand what it looked like is like I had a sleeping bag attached to the side of my face, like this, this huge bandage. And I had to drive myself home. We'll probably get to that later, but I didn't have a lot of support at the time. Yeah. And so I had this huge sleeping bag, and I drove myself home. I had to fly out the next day. It was terrible. So I ended up cutting all the bandage off, and I kind of messed the stitches up. So I have a little scar on my nose that I wasn't supposed to have. And I went out. It was kind of cool, though, because I tweeted about it, and people showed up at the shows because I said, hey, guys, I'm going to have – and I took a photo, and I was like, I'm going to have a Band-Aid across my face because I had to have something over it because it looked, very Frankenstein because they had taken skin from the back of my neck and put it on my nose. That's a great – like modern medicine, surgeries, all that is great if you make sure and get below your neckline. But this guy didn't. He cut the back, like where I have hair follicles. Mm-hmm. So I now have skin grafted to my nose that will grow hair out. So if I don't stay on it, like I'll have these like 4 little strands of hairs going, wow, we like the front view. We've seen the back view forever. And now this is new angle. And so I have to like stay on to that. But anyway, because you asked about my surgery. Yeah. So then I was free and clear for a while. Oh, and people showed up at the shows with Band-Aids over their nose.
Nice.
Which was so cool because I was very self-conscious. I felt like I was back in high school and everybody was going to make fun of me. And already Tim wouldn't let me sit at the cool table during lunch. And so, I'm already dealing with that. And then now I've got a Band-Aid across my face. But like fans showed up with Band-Aids across their face, and they called themselves the Bob Band-Aid Brigade.
Nice.
And that's cool. But okay, fast forward. Yeah, right before I was supposed to do this interview with you, I noticed there was this place on right under my ear on my jawline, and I was like, and my wife was like, you've got to go get it checked out because you have history, and I've never done well in history, so I thought I'll just take her word for it. And so I went, and sure enough, it was cancer. So they had to cut it off. Well, they scheduled it pretty quickly because COVID, they're just looking to cut anybody. Like, I guess they're bored.
Right.
And so they were like, yeah, come on in, or you can drop by the house, or, I'll be at Taco Bell at 8, whatever. And so I went, and they cut it out, and I was supposed to do that interview with you that afternoon. And I was like, there is no way. And they ended up cutting quite a bit, but they did a great job. You can't even really see a scar. I know my jawline is so chiseled that it's hard to see anything but that. Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm good to go.
But for those that maybe don't know, which is probably 2 people out of the 30 that might listen, Bob is an incredible comedian. He's been around about 20 years. Or how long have you?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm shocked. I didn't know you were up to 30 now. Like that's amazing, man. I'm so proud of you, Dave. Yeah, somebody asked me that the other day, and I used to keep track. I know it's over 20 years. I think it's 23 years that I've been doing stand-up. I started if people like math, like my wife, I started in 97. So whatever that is.
So yeah, that would be 23 years or 22 given the failure of 2020.
Yeah. So 22 good years, 23 years total.
So for those that haven't heard the story, how did you get into doing stand-up comedy?
Okay, so I grew up in a very, very awesome family. My mom and dad were very hands-on, just great childhood, which is usually not how comedians' stories start. Like usually comedians come from like pain or, addictions or, darkness. And then that's why they have to get on stage because they need that extra little hug that the audience gives them. But I had a great childhood. My dad was super funny. He was the school superintendent at my school. And so every once in a while he would come and have lunch with me, and everybody, talk about sitting at the cool table. Everybody wanted to sit at our table because my dad and I would just sit and just joke. Like we would just talk about what happened that morning or what happened in the weekend. and everybody would congregate around to hear us just be funny. So I've always loved humor. My dad would let me stay up and watch the Tonight Show. If there was a comedian on, he'd let me stay up. I could watch Johnny's monologue, and then I had to go to bed, but he would let me stay up and watch a comedian if they were on. Always loved it. Never thought I'd do it. Never wanted to get on stage. Wasn't a dream of mine. I went to college, was going to be a teacher. I was going to kind of follow my dad's footsteps. I was going to be a teacher and then a principal and the superintendent. My junior year, they had a stand-up competition. They were having high school weekend, and they wanted to have all these like crazy cool events like, hey, look at us, we're fun. We've got a comedy club. And so they had a stand-up competition, which is basically just, anybody that was going to college could sign up. And I didn't even sign up. Actually, the lady was putting it on called me the night before and asked me why I didn't do it. And because when they came up with the idea, evidently they said, well, Smiley will do it. And then I had a friend named Mark who was really funny. And so they thought we would do it, but we didn't. Neither one of us signed up. And so the comedians they had were not going to be very good. So they're kind of panicking. And so the lady called me the night before and was like, hey, will you, actually what she told me, she said, we know how frugal you are, because I was pretty famous on campus for two things. One, I really was kind of the funny guy. And then two, I was very, very cheap, like very, eat cereal with a fork to save on milk, kind of cheap. And so I would, so she said, we know how frugal you are, which I thought was nice instead of saying cheap. And she said, we thought that the cash prize would have definitely enticed you. And I was like, wait a minute, hang on, what? And come to find out there was a cash prize that I didn't even know about. So I signed up, I did the stand-up competition. I won, not because I was good, but everybody else was terrible. And I won some money, and I thought, what a great experience. So fast forward, graduate, going to be a teacher. Before I became a teacher, I wanted to see what it was like to make money, though. And so I was working as a photographer and was going to do that for a while and then start teaching, kind of get debt-free and get a little nest egg and that kind of stuff. And this guy, I was actually driving in Dallas. I was doing photography. This is going to tell everybody how old I am, but my pager went off, and yeah, I know it's terrible, isn't it? And so I looked at the number. It was area code 615, which I didn't know what that was. Now I know it's Nashville, but at the time I didn't. And so I thought it was somebody calling about doing, me doing photography for their company or something. So I pull over to a Cracker Barrel payphone. And I call this number, and this guy's like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I used to go to school with you, and I'm living in Nashville. I'm road managing this guy named Clay Cross. We're about to leave for tour, and Clay said it'd be fun to have a comedian come out and, keep the crowd entertained in between the musical acts. And he said, I saw you do that stand-up competition in college, and I thought you were good, and I thought you were clean. So do you want to go on tour with us? And I'm standing at a Cracker Barrel payphone, and I was so flippant. Like I had no idea it was about to change my life. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, how long's the tour? And he was like, it's like 6. It kind of threw me. He's like 6 weeks, but it may go to 8. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds fun. Like I was so just nonchalant, not realizing like it was going to alter my entire life. And so I hung up. I booked a one-way flight on Southwest Airlines, not a sponsor, to Nashville, got off a plane, walked onto a tour bus, and went out as a comedian, standing in front of like 800 to 1,200 people a night on the Clay Cross tour. And Clay was really gracious and like encouraged me and, wanted me to, pursue it. In fact, when that tour ended, because they couldn't pay me to do comedy, but they really wanted a comedian, but they didn't have it in the budget. And so they hired me to do merchandise so that I would get paid. And then, but really they were bringing me out to do stand-up. And so Clay actually, we became really good friends, and he asked me to stay on and do his summer dates. And so I stayed on and did that, had a good solid, it sounds like I'm bragging, but I had a good solid like 3 minutes of stuff. And the Newsboys saw me. And they were like, hey, we're leaving for tour in the fall. Do you want to go on tour with us? And again, I grew up this little country kid in Texas. And so I never listened to any music. much less we didn't have Christian music available. We had it. Christian music to me was what we sang every Sunday at our church. That was Christian music. I didn't know there was an industry. I didn't know about anything. I'd heard Amy Grant and that she was just a really nice person, but I had, no idea about any of it. So I didn't know who the Newsboys were. And I was like, again, okay, that sounds good. But, eventually I got to get back to Texas because I'm going to be a teacher. And so I went out on the Newsboys tour, and that was called the Take Me to Your Leader tour, which turned out to be the #1 tour in Christian music that year.
Wow.
And so now I'm standing in front of like 4,000 to 6,000 people a night trying to be a comedian, with no, I'd written a lot of stuff by then, but, it's still, I think it was Billy Crystal said, the first couple of years of stand-up, you feel like you're an imposter, and the comedy police are going to come arrest you on stage for being an imposter. And so, yeah, for a long time, I felt like that. Like it was really bad trying to figure out how to do it, because you don't start like that. You're supposed to start out in the clubs, doing 3-minute open mic nights or wherever you can get a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, and on the Clay Cross tour, they had bought these moving lights that kept breaking. And so from almost the second night on, the lights would break or something would go wrong, and they'd be like, Bob, go up there and stall for 15 minutes. And I had my little tight set that I'd done at that stand-up competition, and I'd added to it and stuff. But honestly, I had about 10 minutes of really good stuff. And there were nights where I was on stage for like 40 minutes. Just trying. So that's how I learned, not in an open mic comedy club or anything like that. I learned standing on the stage, trying to keep people entertained who really wanted to see Clay Cross and not me. And so it's kind of baptism by fire.
Yeah, that's definitely a hard learning environment, because you're on tour, you're away from home. There's a lot more pressure to deliver, whereas somebody growing up in a club or coming up in a club, 3 minutes, if your 3 minutes is horrible, it's only 3 minutes. You're not stranded. You're not going to get fired. And
you're not on a tour with 5 more weeks left of the tour. Yeah, it was pretty gutsy. My parents were really encouraging. In fact, I did that tour, and then when I got the offer to do the Newsboys tour, I came back home, and my parents had always been so encouraging about and liked that I had a goal in mind and a life, plan. And I got home, and I was really nervous about telling them, like, I'm going to move to Nashville and I'm going to do this Newsboys tour because people keep telling me I could make it as a comedian. And in my speech to them, I reassured them, like, the second it doesn't work out, I'm coming home. I'm going to use my degree. I'm going to get, and my dad was like, hey, do what you love. Go for it. Like they were, my mom and dad were just very, very encouraging. And so, yeah, I moved to Nashville full time. During that. So I guess that was 97 as well. So I guess I started in 96.
Okay.
The end of 96, and then going into 97 is when I did that Newsboy tour. And people kept hiring me.
That's awesome. So let's go back a little bit and hear about you growing up. You grew up in a really good home. Was it a Christian home or? Okay. And so when did it go from being just growing up in a Christian home to Bob Smiley has accepted Jesus for himself? How did that happen?
Pretty early on. One of the things my parents did very well, and I'm not saying this is how you should do this with every kid. In fact, we have some kids in our house right now that this would not work on. But they knew I was very strong-willed and, very kind of make up my own mind. So they didn't really force faith on me. They wanted it to be my own faith. They wanted it to be my own relationship with Jesus. So I was required to go to church. I was required to be involved in the youth group. But outside of that, they didn't really, we weren't waking up and having long Bible studies every morning or they weren't like, I hate to use this word, but this is how I think people would view it. They weren't forcing it down my throat. They were presenting it like, this is what we believe. We've seen, God, like we've felt him. We've dedicated our life to Jesus Christ. So this is what we're passionate about. We want you to have the same passion, but we want it to be your own passion. So they I was required to go to church, but they really didn't force anything on me. But because I respected my parents so much, it was kind of an easy transition. I was like, well, if they believe this, then, and I respect them and think they're very, very intelligent people, then I want to know about this. I want to look into this. And so I kind of started, I guess, my own path, not realizing they really had guided me on that path. But I started really seeking out a relationship with Christ and being a Christian. And, I went to a very, very small school. I had 17 my graduating class.
Wow.
I know that because my girlfriend was ranked 17th in our senior year because they passed our numbers out in English class. And I'd never counted how many people were in my class before. And I was like, I shouldn't use her name. I'll make up a name.
Okay.
Although now I really want to use the real name. I'll make up a name. We'll call her Amy. It was really Amy. But I was like, I think I was 8th in class, or I was right in the middle. And I was like, Amy, what'd you get? And she was like, 17. And I was like, oh. And then I had that awkward moment where I was trying to count how many kids we had in our class, knowing that she had to be close to the bottom, but she was at the bottom of the class. She skipped school a lot. She was building a testimony during that time.
Okay.
Let's just say that. So, but yeah, so we had 17, so very, very small school and not a lot of Christian kids. There was kind of, so I've always kind of gone against the grain anyway. So it was really kind of easy to be the Christian kid in school because I was already different in so many other ways that, people just kind of accepted, oh, he's funny. He's kind of weird. He perceives things differently. He loves Jesus. Like, of course I was going to go against what a lot of kids in the school thought. So yeah, that was kind of my childhood.
So at what point, it sounds kind of like you grew into it. Was there like a moment where you're like, wow, I truly believe, Christ is real. Christ is really my Savior. Was there a moment, or is it more just a gradual process? It
was a gradual process. I did have some of those, like, I've got a friend named Matthew West who is a guitar player.
Yeah.
He has these, he calls it a blue couch moment where, like, all of a sudden he just gives his life to Jesus and stuff. I kind of felt like, without some big, huge proclamation, I felt like I was always kind of giving my life to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I was a troublemaker, and I was, I don't want to make it sound like I was this great kid or anything. Like I have a great relationship with my dad, and I think a lot of that was built on the fact that he was a superintendent. So I was in the office quite a bit, especially because it was a small school, and if you get bored, you're going to do stuff, Yeah. And so. So yeah, I wasn't a perfect kid, but I just kind of always just, didn't want to do anything too bad, or, I had a great, strong moral compass and all that. Was baptized, 13, and I did kind of have right before I went off to college. So we lived way out in the country, and we had a little hot tub outside. We were poor, so I found out later it was like a plastic tub and the Texas heat would just heat it during the day. But yeah, we had a hot tub and sitting outside in that, and man, the stars. I don't know if you've been out in the country when the sky is totally clear, and the stars were out, and I started feeling like very insignificant, like very, very insignificant, because I was looking at this vast open sky, and then just like hearing out in the country, you're hearing, creatures in the night in the woods and armadillos running through the yard. And I was like, man, I'm the small town kid who's going to try to go out, go off to a college. And I was feeling very insignificant. And I truly felt that night, the Lord kind of whisper in the breeze, in the quiet, which in the Bible, he does that a lot of like, no, I've got a plan for you. I have a plan for you. And so that was kind of a big moment where I felt very, very close to God. Got out of the hot tub and went inside, which was awkward. My parents were having a church party, so I looked really weird going in my Speedo, but I wanted to share the news with them. And so it was more of if you want a car term, like it was just a gradual on the pedal thing. It wasn't like a quick, racing start or anything like that.
Yeah, and even though I live in Chicago now, I grew up in Virginia and West Virginia, and so I know those nights where it's like there's no light pollution. You just see the stars. You hear, the wolves or whatever in the woods. And so it's very easy if you take those moments to realize, wow, I am pretty insignificant. And then to know that God still knows you by name and has a plan for you, that can be such a huge revelation. And sometimes it takes forever to really appreciate that.
You want to know my favorite father moment ever? I think it's my favorite father moment ever. Above my kids being born, anything. I took Trent, that's whose room I'm in right now, and you can see all the deer horns and all this stuff. I took Trent to East Texas, and I had traded a free show for this church in exchange for them letting me hunt because I just moved back to Texas, didn't have a place to hunt. And so I kind of I was writing humor articles for this Christian hunting magazine. And so somebody reached out to me and I was like, hey, I'll do a free show if you'll give me a place to hunt. And so they did. And they had this little like small camper, on two wheels kind of deal, just parked out in the middle of the woods. They drive us out there the night before and we get in the camper. And I think he was like 4 or 5 years old, Trent was. And we get up at 5:15 the next morning and it snowed, which is crazy for Texas. Like it very rarely snows. So we wake up and it's snowing. And when I walk outside and Trent's getting out of the camper, he's, kind of waking up and everything. My favorite father moment ever is he stepped out of the camper and he grew up in the city, and grew up, he's probably 4 or 5, but he had not been up that late at night or that early in the morning. And it's, city lights and all that. He had never been way out in the country to see the stars and how bright they were. And even though it was snowing, it was a clear, like I don't know how it worked, but there were really no clouds. Like it was so clear. And he looked up and I could just see the majestic like light bulb go on and like, wow, God is super cool to create all this. And we talked about it, that we got in the deer stand and we talked about it. But seeing him see the stars for the first time was amazing. And I never talked to him about that story. And on my birthday, my wife made this big, nice meal. And she was like, hey, let's all go around and tell a story about your dad, just some cool story. And that's the story that Trent told. So that was a moment for me, but that was also obviously a moment for him that he remembered, even though he was super young. So that was cool. How in the world did we end up talking about that?
We talked about stars and that moment in the hot tub with you.
Yeah. See, I'm not too far off track.
No, not at all. So after you become a Christian pretty young and you grow up with some very strong Christian parents, you go off to college. Were there any trials or any challenges of faith when you left home, or were you pretty well grounded and founded in faith?
That's a great question. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because this is a terrible setup, but I've got a friend at church who is he drives a forklift for his job, which is awesome because he has a job. He keeps rubbing it in my face now that COVID has hit and stuff. But he broke both his arms during Thanksgiving, and so he can't perform very well. Well, right before I got on this interview, I had a salad because if COVID ever does end and I can actually get back to touring, I want to be able to fit on the stage. So I'm trying to get back in shape. And I bit my tongue, and so he can't really drive the forklift because he broke both arms. Well, I talk for a living. I just bit my tongue. So I totally know how he feels now. I can totally relate. So yes, got to college, had really good friends. I tried to pick good friends, that were going to be encouraging. So no, I never really had that big. I think the first 3 weeks that I was out there in college by myself, I didn't go to church on Sunday mornings. I just slept in because I'd never missed church before. And, it kind of made me feel like a rebel, and which is so funny because I would wake up and I would feel bad and read my Bible for probably longer than I would have sat in church, but yeah, I'm a man. I skipped church, and then I was like, what am I doing? First of all, I love church. And then second of all, like, that's how you meet a lot of people in college, is you go to church. And so that was probably my biggest rebellion thing. Yeah. I went to a Christian college. So obviously 80% of the people there were not Christians. So I don't know how I was. No, that's not true.
There is some truth. I mean, there are a lot that go there because mom and dad kind of pressure. They want them to be protected, even though they don't know the Lord. And sometimes they become more of the influence than the Christians that are there.
Yeah, we would actually talk about that, because we would talk about missionary dating. Where like, oh, I'm gonna date her, and me and my friends, we would warn each other like, who's influencing who here? Like who's, we realize that there's a lot of power in relationships, and so you got to be really careful and not do that, like not missionary date.
Yeah, that's very dangerous because usually it's the one that's not saved that wins in the end because we just want to love them into heaven.
Yeah. And let's be honest, man. Like, Dave, sin looks fun.
Yes.
Sin looks fun. It comes with a ton of consequences, but it looks fun. So, yeah, it's, especially in college, it's real easy to just, be like, well, I want to relate to her. So I want to, let's go to this bar. Let's go to, I'm not using personal examples. I'm sharing part of Tim Hawkins' testimony.
Yeah.
That's not true. You got to put that's not true part in.
I might cut that out and see what happens. I don't know. After you graduate college, you're hitting the road. You've got the degree in your back pocket, but you're out touring, and then your life just turns to where you're not teaching, but you're using comedy as your career and as a ministry. During your career, what was the biggest challenge as far as making comedy your career?
Early on was getting people to listen to me, because obviously I look back on it and be like, wow, God not only opened the door, he kind of kicked me through it, because I kept going, well, I'm going to do this tour, but then I'm going to go back and teach. And God was like, nope, this is the path I have for you. And so he kept just putting me on these tours. And now that I know the business, I look back on it and I'm like, how in the world did I get invited to be on tour with all these big bands? Because nobody does that, first of all. And then second of all, they would pay me. And most opening acts, they pay to be on tour with the headliner. And so, and I didn't get paid a lot, but, at the time I didn't know the business. And so I was like, man, $50 a day, that's, how am I supposed to make a living like that? And I was like, and then I talked to an opening band one time and they were like, we're paying $800 a day to be out here. And I was like, oh, never mind, just feeling real. So at first, the hardest part was getting paid. I was on tour with a band called the Supertones, and they played exclusively, not on purpose, but they drew 800 to 1,200 kids, like just crazy wild kids. Most of the shows were in empty warehouses with no chairs, so everybody could mosh around. And they're all, punk and ska and, like just showing up and all the face piercings and, eyebrow. It looked like it fell face first in a tackle box and, spiky hair. And they'd all be like, Supertones. And they'd be like, well, first, we have a guy who's going to come out and tell you some jokes. Please welcome little Bobby Smiley. And I'd have to come out to all these just like grunge kids that were just so ready for the Supertones. And I have to try to get them to listen to me for 10, 15 minutes, talk about my grandmother or, whatever I was talking about at the time. And so that was really challenging. It's kind of how I came up with my style is just rapid fire. I tried to get on that tour. I tried to get to a punchline in 20 seconds because I knew after 40 seconds, if I didn't hit a punchline, I was going to lose that crowd. But if I came out and I had one big joke, then they might quiet down for a second. And if I could hit them with another one, then if I could do that for 2 minutes, then they would settle down and be like, oh, let's give this guy a chance and listen to me. So yeah, especially early on, I would just come out just guns ablaze and just, boom, 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 boom,
And now that you're raising 5 boys, that's become a handy skill to talk to boys and get their attention.
Yes, and you have to think quickly because you're up there just fighting for your life. And when you have 5 boys running around and one's on a hoverboard holding a bowl of, macaroni, and you're seeing he's about to spin out of control, and the other one is, asking if he could give the cat a bath, and you're trying to say, we don't have a cat, like you have all this stuff going on. It does help to have a quick mind to be able to go, no, you can't do that. Put that down. Turn the batteries off. It's
right.
Yeah, it definitely helps.
And I don't want to dive in too much that you're not ready to share or want to talk about, but
man, okay, I'm an open book. You can ask me anything. I'm totally fine with it.
So the reason you have 5 boys is because you're in a blended family.
Oh yeah, I don't want to talk about that.
Okay. All right.
No, I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. Yeah, I talk about it all the time. So yeah, we are a blended family. I have 3 kids. My wife, which tomorrow, I know this will air in January, but tomorrow will be our 2-year anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. I can't wait to see what you get us. So she has 2 boys and I have 3 boys. And actually, I can tell this, but when I first talked to her on the phone, I was like, how many kids do you have? And because I was raising 3 boys by myself, and already it was crazy. And she was like, I have two boys. And I can't believe I said this, but I go, oh. And she goes, what? And I go, I don't know if I want more kids. And she said, this is just a glimpse of how amazing this woman is. She said, 2 more kids is 2 more opportunities to love and to be loved. And it's 2 more opportunities to show kids what a heavenly father's unconditional love looks like through an earthly father.
More of the Gifts for Glory podcast in just a moment. Our host, Dave Ebert, is now accepting bookings for your next event. Dave specializes in improv coaching to improve self-esteem, team camaraderie, communication, creativity, and developing your own unique voice. Improv is an amazing tool to learn how to listen actively, respond appropriately, and communicate more efficiently, all while having an absolute blast. For churches and ministries, ask about our Improv Your Witness workshop, designed to get you out of your own way when sharing the gospel and your testimony. For information, contact booking@giftsforglory.com. Booking@gifts4glory.com. Booking@giftsforglory.com. We'll be back with more of this amazing conversation next on the Gifts for Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts for God's glory.
So one time my dad was leading singing at this little church, and I was sitting down front, and he goes, on this next song, why don't we all stand to our feet? And I don't know why I did this, but I was like, yeah, everybody stand to your feet. Good thing he said that. I almost stood to my liver. We never sang that song. He didn't say a word. He just shut the book. He walked right down. He picked me up. He carried me like a football outside. Yeah, and he's a Tony Romo fan, so he fumbled me several times. Are we still okay? But no, back to the real story. He really did. He picked me up and he carried me out. And I deserved it. I should never have ever smarted off to my parents. And, but it was so embarrassing because it was right in front of my children. And,
This is just a glimpse of how amazing this woman is. She said, 2 more kids is 2 more opportunities to love and to be loved. And it's 2 more opportunities to show kids what a heavenly father's unconditional love looks like through an earthly father. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, wow.
And then... Well, then she said, how many kids do you have? And I said 3, and we got disconnected really quick. But I was able to get her back on the phone. And so we started, up dating, and here we are about to celebrate 2 years. So yeah, 5 kids. Sorry to cut you off, but yeah, we do. We have 5 boys.
And for both of you, you guys you and Sarah both went through some pretty painful divorces that led to the blended family. And through that, I know that you were still performing, you're still doing comedy. How did that trial of, going through the divorce and the brokenness, how were you able to get through that?
Not smoothly, honestly. Like it was brutal. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So I was married 18 years. We had a huge fight because I did not like her boyfriend. And we were hanging out with this other couple at church. They were very wealthy and we were vacationing with them and just never saw it coming ever. And so there was a lot of things going on. Two families were splitting up in our church, and so church people, it was weird seeing church people, how they handled it. And honestly, the people that I thought were my closest friends just abandoned me. And not only some of them abandoned me, but some of them were all of a sudden totally fine going out with the new couple, the new wealthy couple that would take them out to eat. And, they were, these friends of mine that were supposed to be Christians were like totally okay with what was going on. And, even though they were invested in our lives and our children's lives, they were like, oh, well, people want to do what they want to do. And, they were just totally. And so it was very disheartening. Like one of the lessons that I learned from that was you can't let your idea of Jesus be influenced by negativity that is coming through people that profess to live like Christ. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like a lot of people are like, well, Jesus is not for me because I went to church and those people were jerks. And I was like, well, yeah, they probably were jerks, but that's not Jesus.
Right.
That you can't let what church people, what they do negatively affect your relationship with Christ. And I struggled with that because even some of the church leaders that were adamant that nothing was going on. And then all of a sudden they got married and they were like, oh, well, I guess stuff was going on, but let's love each other. And I was like, is there accountability? Is there any kind of that going on? And so I had to deal with that. I had to deal with the boys, all of a sudden, because, and again, we used to vacation with these people. And so they, all of a sudden my boys had to deal with all this anger and betrayal and abandonment and all this stuff. And I was dealing with the same, and I did not handle it well. Like I dropped like 42 pounds and I already was pretty thin, but I was emaciated. I wouldn't eat. I didn't sleep. I was destroying my body. But the whole time trying to get up and make lunches for the boys and tell the boys like, hey, God's got us. We can do this. We can. But honestly, for a while, I knew it was the right thing to say. And looking back on it now, my wife says this, that you said the right thing until it really became the right thing. Because I kept saying, God's got us. God's going to get us through. And he did. But when I was saying that at the beginning, I honestly didn't believe it. Like I did not believe it because I was like, I never had the floor just drop out from under me like that. Because like I said, grew up in a really loving Christian home, was kind of the funny kid at school. I know you're probably going to ask about this later, but yes, I still hold the scoring record in basketball at my high school for 41 points against Prosper. Not that I'm still holding on to that Glory Day thing, but I do call every year to our principal, Miss Black, and make sure that I still hold the record. But I'd had a really great life, toured with some cool bands. My career was going well. And then all of a sudden, man, the world just burned down. And I did not handle it well. And, tried to pour myself into my boys. And then after, kind of got better, the first couple of shows that I had to do was miserable because one, nobody knew. And, I was still in hopes that they would come to their senses and, not do what they were, headed toward doing. But I would get on stage and I'd make people laugh. I remember the first time I was on stage, like, I think it was Indiana, and everybody was laughing and I was miserable inside. And I stood there while people were laughing and they gave me an applause break or they were clapping over a joke. And I remember thinking, how dare you laugh? Like, do you
Right.
not know how much pain is going on in this world? Like, how can you, which is just a messed up mentality, because I was there to make them laugh, and they were probably going through their own stuff, which is why comedy is great. You want a release. You want to, to get a ticket away from your problems for a little while. And so, but it was tough, man. It was honestly, it was a really, really dark time of, trying to keep my career alive. Also worrying that churches would book me, even though it wasn't my choice or, anything. I didn't know if, churches would bring in a divorced, Christian comedian. And my DVD right before that is called Mullets on Fire.
Mm-hmm.
And a big portion of that was talking about how great it is to be married and all the funny little things about being married. And I talked a lot of stuff about my wife, like personally about my wife, but all in a positive way. Like it wasn't a negative. And so I had that out there, and now, they were like, hey, do that bit about you texting. I was like, no, I can't do that bit anymore.
Yeah, right. And Mullets on Fire, I've actually seen that. It's on Pure Flix. Yeah, it's really funny, and it's kind of it's a shame that you had so much positive stuff about your family right as it was about to crumble. But
I remember the guy, the night I record that, the guy actually called me and was like, hey, man, just want to wish you the best. I filmed it in California. Just wish you best, man. Just rooting for you. And I always think about that phone call like, you snake. Like, you knew what was going on. Oh, it's just so. But, so we got through it. It was really tough. And then my kids wanted me to date, which is weird because, I was always faithful. I'm faithful in any relationship. Like when I hang out with my pastor, I don't look at other pastors.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Like, I wonder what his sermon's like. I don't. I'm like dedicated. So it was just weird all of a sudden being out there. But I also didn't want to be lonely, and my kids were real encouraging about it, And so, yeah, it was a very weird time.
How long after everything happened did you start looking at dating again?
It was about, I want to say maybe, because see, all that timeline stuff is so dark. So I forget a lot of it, but I want to say about maybe 8 months, because there was a long period of time where I held out that, that I just kept thinking I'd wake up and, like we'd just be back to everything being fine again. Like I just never thought that would be, I just never thought. People go through some midlife crisis stuff, and it really just can change them. They can lose a family member, and it can just rock their world. And if they don't get help processing that stuff, then they're capable of doing anything. And so, I really should have saw some signs, and just been like, hey, are you okay? And all that. But yeah, it's just, it was dark. So I want to say it's about maybe 8 months before, I was even looking. And then it was even longer. My wife just reminded me that we were putting up Christmas lights and with my bonus kids outside, Dylan and Mason. And we were talking about how we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary. Well, I had a 3-year plan that I wasn't going to marry anybody until I dated them for 3 years, because and that's just trust issues that, that I now all of a sudden have because of what I went through. But I was like, soon, I'm going to meet somebody and I'm going to date them for 3 years before I even, think of proposing and stuff. And of course I dated my wife like a year and we got married. So she was kind of rubbing that in my face that I did have a 3-year plan. But
God has a different time frame than we do. And just hearing, and we haven't really even talked about it much or mentioned it, but you have a podcast with Sarah, your wife, and it's such a great show. Not because of anything technical or anything. It's just hearing two people who God has brought together and hearing them tell the stories of doing life. And I think that's the greatest piece of Hook, Line, and Smiley is you just hear that, number one, there's hope, no matter, because, and Sarah's got her own story about her divorce and the things she went through. And then you had still being in the public eye, dealing with divorce, dealing with brokenness and all these other different relationships. And just hearing how that even despite that, God has brought two people together in such a way that they're helping each other complete the healing. And that's what I enjoy about Hook, Line, and Smiley, and I know that it helps others. So what was the genesis? What got you guys decided to say, let's do a podcast together?
We were having a romantic picnic out. Again, I'm pretty frugal. And so I have discovered that there's a place on this lake that's right across from our big pavilion where all the big, name bands perform. And so I would take her out there if bands were playing that she liked, because nobody's out at this little park area, at night. But if you sit at this one spot that I've found, the music bounces off and carries over the water. And so you can hear the concert like you're right there. Nice. Now you can't see them, but you also don't have to pay $80 a ticket to go see them. And so we were sitting out one night, and we were listening to, I think it was Hootie and the Blowfish were playing, and we were just listening, and we were talking about kind of some of the stuff, and she's pretty open about this, so I can say this on here, but she lost a brother when she was young, when she was in high school, and that was very, very traumatic, and so she's been through that, then the divorce, and trying to be a single mom raising 2 kids. She's been through a lot. And we were kind of talking about that. We talked about it a lot before, but, we were just kind of just sharing stories. And I was kind of telling her some new stories that, I'd kind of gone back and remembered about, the single days of trying to take care of my kids. And, because it did get like a frat house in our house. Like there was nothing that looked like a woman had ever lived there whenever Sarah moved in. But so we were sitting there, we were sitting on this picnic, this blanket, having a picnic, and she was cracking me up. Like, she was making me laugh so hard. And then she turned it and was making a spiritual connection and and basically was saying, God's got us. Like, we are each other's partner. We're each other's person, but only because God is the glue that has glued us together. And so as long as that glue is there, and I was like, this is what people need to hear. Like, first of all, people need to hear your funny stories and stuff, but people also need to hear that. And she'd been talking about how people, she felt like people don't get a real sense of who I am because they go and they see me on stage and they hear, my funny stories and all that. And I do have, some message and testimony stuff on stage, but they don't really get to know the inside behind the curtain me. And so she was like, they need a Bob Smiley decaf, like they get the full caffeinated version on stage, but so that's how we came up with the idea. We were like, let's start a podcast where, we'll talk a little bit about my career and I'll tell funny stories and keep everybody updated on what crazy bits I'm writing or what's going on. And we'll have, some of my friends on. I had Hawkins on last week. I've had some of the Newsboys on and Shonda Pierce and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's just she and I, and we're just talking about the daily grind of blending a family, we're basically newlyweds. Like we're a newly married couple, but with all the old baggage that old married couples have. And so we talk a lot about that. It is funny, but we really try to have a lot of encouragement and, a lot of meat to go on that plate.
I've listened to all, as of what we're recording, of 50 episodes, which included this week with lesser-known comedian Tim Hawkins. Like I said, it's 2 people who have been broken, who've been through brokenness, that are putting the pieces together. But like you said, the glue is God. And I think anybody that's been through any kind of traumatic experience can hear and feel the joy that you guys have, because there are times even on the podcast where it's like you guys aren't in the best of moods. You guys are doing it because you want to keep the schedule, and you could hear that there's still some of that married relationship, even though you guys love each other and there's joy. There's times where it's not perfect.
You want to know a big secret?
Sure.
Anytime that I have a guest on the podcast, you may notice that Sarah's never there. It's usually because we're in a huge fight. So, like, if people are like, "Oh, wow, you had Mac Powell from Third Day on," and I was like, "Yeah, that was one of the worst weeks of my life." Not because of Mac, I love Mac, but because we were having a huge fight. that way. But that's real. That's reality, is that, that's something I found out is, couples fight. I didn't know that. And if you fight, that means you're still passionate. And so, so when we fight, I have to remind myself. It helps that Sarah made a sign that I can read, but I need to remind myself that the fighting is okay because it means we're still passionate about each other. So yeah, and there are times we go on the podcast and we're in a bad mood and we're just like, all right, let's be real about it and talk about, what we're doing. And then fans weigh in and that gets awkward because, most of my fans are wrong because they side with Sarah and, it's just like a ridiculous. Ironically, as soon as I'm done with this podcast, Sarah and I are going to go record episode 51, which is going to be the last podcast for this year. And again, I know this podcast will go out because evidently you don't edit as fast as I do, but but we'll have 51 out, which is, one every week we're going to encourage people to, not listen the last week and just spend time with their family. But that's what I'm getting ready to do. So you're kind of pregame warm up. I just realized that. I hope that didn't hurt your feelings.
No, I will be able to listen to 51 and be like, wow, I either helped or if 51's the worst ever, I'm like, it's Tinley Park all over again.
Yeah. I took all the energy out of the room.
And I highly encourage everyone to listen. You can also sponsor the podcast because Bob lives on touring and he hasn't been able to do much of anything in 2020 because of the pandemic. You can support by sending PayPal to Bob at bobsmiley.com or Venmo, Bob-Smiley-3 or dash, however you want to spell it.
Yeah.
So support Hook, Line, and Smiley. Check it out on all the major platforms.
Man, thank you for saying that because, I always feel weird about that. But honestly, in March, all my shows canceled. Mm-hmm. And this is, like you said, this is how I support my family, but it all canceled out. And I didn't panic. And I think it really was because of what I've been through in the past and because of what Sarah's been through in the past. We didn't really panic because we knew things could get really bad. Yeah. And God would still get us through it. But it was weird because I've never had a bad year financially at all. And all of a sudden, I wasn't just going to have a bad year financially. I was going to have a no financial year. And I say that not to beg your 30 people to, support us, but I say that because we decided we were going to ask people, if they were enjoying the podcast to donate. And we thought we would maybe get $50, or something like that. And it floated us for 2 months. Like for 2 months, we would not have made our bills if it wasn't for people doing that. And then the other thing, really quick, I know you were trying to get rid of me, but another cool thing that God did. So when my first CD came out, Focus on the Family got a copy of it. And they liked it. And this guy named Jesse, he messaged me, and he's the editor of Clubhouse Magazine, which is their junior high magazine. It's called Clubhouse Magazine with Focus on the Family. And he was like, hey, will you write a funny article about going back to school? And when I was a kid, I got the worst haircut in the world. The guy basically put, it used to be called a Flowbee, but it was a haircut like clippers with a vacuum cleaner cut. Well, he had made his own. And I went in and I was like, hey, I like to part it here and I like to fold over, but I like it a little above my eyes. And I guess what he heard was like, he wants to keep the skin on his head because that was it. It was horrible. So I wrote an article about that, but I thought of a cell phone joke and I thought, well, I can't put a cell phone joke in if it's me. And so I decided for that article just to create a character. And so I called him Average Boy just because I thought, yeah, he's just the average boy. And so I wrote this article. They put it out. They got a ton of mail from kids saying, hey, can that average boy write something? And so I've been writing that for, probably about 18, 19 years, every month in Clubhouse Magazine. And then they had me write 2 comedy devotional books for middle school kids as Average Boy. The reason why I'm telling you all this, I love how to look back and see how God takes care of us. Mm-hmm. So people listening to our podcast supported us for a couple months. Well, in December, before COVID was even a word, Focus on the Family said, hey, your books are doing well. We're probably thinking about doing a third book. But have you ever thought of doing an Average Boy podcast where you actually, write the scripts and you do the voice of Average Boy? And Jesse became my editor, and Jesse's the best editor in the world. Like, I'll never do a project without him. And so Jesse is the voice as the adult, and then I'm Average Boy. And so I wrote some scripts, and they were like, we don't have a budget for it. But it was in December of last year. And they were like, it's going to be for families. We're going to keep it short. It's going to be like an 18 to 20 minute podcast. We want it to be just like your books, funny, and then spiritual message, and then, some scripture and stuff. So I was like, oh yeah, cool. No problem. So I did it for free. We did, I think, maybe 8, and they just put it out there to see if there was interest. And it did super well. It actually kind of competed with their Adventures in Odyssey podcast. Yeah, we were floored. And so all of a sudden, families are listening to this. And so I tell you that because in March, when everything canceled, Focus on the Family was like, this podcast is doing well. Like, we want to keep it going. And so we've budgeted for it. And so they paid me to write the scripts, do the, voice acting, and put out these podcasts. So we're going to finish up in January, but by this February 2021, we'll have 52 podcasts for families to listen to as Average Boy. But that then floated us. Again, we don't know where money's coming from.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, during like September and October and stuff, here's some money to, to help pay our bills. And then in November, I got the third book deal for Average Boy, which I'm working on now. I actually, this morning, you're kind of in the middle of all these mile markers. This is our last Hook, Line, and Smiley podcast. And then this morning, I finished the 15th chapter of the 30-chapter book. So I'm halfway done with the third Average Boy book. So I'm pretty excited about that.
That's awesome. And I just love hearing that God's faithfulness is showing. And because anybody that's seen you, they know that you just come across as this genuine, decent guy, which either means you're a heck of an actor, maybe that should be another career, or I think it's that everyone that knows you or that has followed your career sees the genuineness of who you are. And it's really great to see how God is redeeming the lost time, the hurt, and now seeing you and Sarah together, seeing things, even despite the pandemic, working out for you. So it's a great story. It's a great story of God's faithfulness, and it blesses people to see God bless somebody that's blessed so many others.
Well said, man. Well said. And I didn't even write that for you to say it.
So there are 2 segments that I wrap up every interview with. One's called the interrogation. It's 7 quick questions that otherwise wouldn't have fit in the interview. And then the last one is your wise counsel for anybody that wants to use their gifts for God's glory.
Okay.
So for the first question of the interrogation, what movies can you watch multiple times a year without getting tired of them?
Christian movies?
No, anything goes.
Here's the problem. We have a DVD player called ClearPlay that cuts out all the bad stuff.
Okay.
So I'm going to say these movies, but I don't recommend that you watch these movies because there is stuff in it. But Airplane, I could watch Airplane every single day. I could watch Monty Python's Holy Grail. There's a movie called Top Secret. These are all comedies. Yes. I am a huge Charlie Chaplin fan, and Robert Downey Jr. in the movie Chaplin was spot on. It was, I think, Robert Downey Jr.'s best performance ever. The problem is Charlie Chaplin was a bit of a womanizer. He had 4 wives, and so there is some nudity in that movie. I didn't know that because I've been watching it on our ClearPlay device, and then I put it in it was on Netflix for a little while, and I was like, oh yeah, let's watch this, boys. And so we sat down and I put it on, and I was like, no, I had to turn it off. But it's a great movie. It's such a good movie if you can, find a way to get around that. But so that's, how many did you ask for?
However many that you can think of that.
And then, this is everybody's answer, but probably Mullets on Fire or Breaking Bob.
Yeah, those are excellent. And you don't need a ClearPlay DVD player for those.
No, you don't.
All right, question number 2. What's a habit that you have that Sarah picks on you about?
I eat with my hands and did not realize it. And at any point, Actually, they're pretty clean right now, but she said at any point that I can never go hungry because there's always food on my hands. So that really drives her insane.
Well, so just you can say that you're just trying to save on water so there's fewer dishes to wash.
Yeah, that's right. Although I wash the dishes, so that does make sense actually.
All right, question number 3. Do you have a bit that you love but audiences don't always respond to?
I've got one of my famous bits now is called Church Childcare, and it's about dropping your kid off at church and having them watch your kid. And I did that bit for like 3 years and couldn't get it to work. And I loved that bit, and I finally gave up on it. And then maybe, I can't remember now, but maybe a year later, I'm sitting in church, and a number pops up on the video screen, which means that somebody's kid is being bad, and you're supposed to go get it. And I was like, oh, I had a bit about that. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to bring that back and just see. So I tweaked it a little bit, and just by like changing 2 jokes, just 2 lines in it, all of a sudden the bit snapped and went great. But man, for a long time, I could not get that bit to work, but it was one of my favorites.
Nice. What's a scripture that's challenged you or that's changed your mindset?
John 3:30 is my favorite one. John the Baptist was kind of the big popular dude. Everybody was going to him to get baptized. And then Jesus shows up, which John was telling everybody he was going to show up. And John's disciples got really jealous and came to John and was like, we're the popular ones. Why is everybody going over to Jesus and his disciples? And John first said, hey, I told you I was not him. I told you. I was sent to prepare a place. And then John 3:30, I think it's John 3:30. You might want to check me on this, but it says, John said this. He said, he must become greater. I must become less. So he basically was saying, hey, I was sent to prepare the place, and I was the big dog. But now that Jesus is here, I need to be less, and he needs to be greater. And that's my favorite scripture because that's how we should live our life. Like, every day we should wake up and say, Jesus, you need to be a little greater, and I need to be a little less of myself, a little more of you, a couple cups of coffee, and we'll have a good day.
Yeah, exactly. And you got it right on, John 3:30.
Yeah, I read it all the time. I don't know why when I said it out loud, it sounded weird, but yeah, I figured it was John 3:30. I
do that with scripture all the time. I'll have a favorite or something on my mind, and I'll say it, and I'm like, wait, did I get that right? And yeah. I have a credential in ministry, and it's like I have like a double responsibility to get it right. So it's like, no. All right, so question number 5. What's something you wish you could do over in life?
Man, if I could go back and be on the Newsboys tour, the first one, I've toured with them 4 times, I think. If I could go back to that Take Me to Your Leader tour with the comedy knowledge that I have now, but just young, energetic, man, I would have so much more enjoyed it. If I would have just known, hey, calm down and enjoy the ride because you're gonna make it. You're gonna be okay. But I was so preoccupied with, should I even be trying this? Should I, what am I doing? Am I throwing away a couple of years I could be teaching, or what, and am I funny enough? And, do the Newsboys like me? And all, I was just so insecure. And I'd like to go back and redo that to be like, man, just enjoy it. You got invited by like one of the best bands in the world to tour with them because they thought you were funny and they liked your work ethic and how hard, you worked and stuff. And, so you kind of earned your right, but at the time I didn't feel like it. So I'd like to go back and redo that.
Okay. When was the moment that you knew, I've made it, I'm a professional comedian?
Lafayette, Louisiana is about 3 years into doing comedy. And I had my set hour. I'd worked up to a full hour, and I felt like it was a good hour. And I'm maybe 20 minutes in, and some lady shouts something out, and it doesn't even faze me. And I do a line, like I say something back to her. She heckles me, and I say something back, and then it makes me think of something. So I say a couple more jokes that I'm writing in my head. And then while they're laughing, I'm just kind of enjoying it. And I look around and I see some stuff on the back of the stage. And so I start making some jokes about that. And then that was the moment I was like, oh, I am in control of this room. Like I I have these people's attention and I can take them on any ride I want to take them on. And so I started moving my bits around because I used to go up and this was my hour and I never veered from it because I'm not really a comedian. You know, this is the order. We don't change it around. And the rest of the night, like I was changing bits around. I was ad-libbing. I was talking about, you know, random stuff. And I walked off stage and I was like, okay, those comedy police are not going to come get me because I'm actually a comedian. Like I remember feeling like, okay, I've got this.
Nice. So final question is, if time and money were no object, book your dream show with you and 3 other acts, and where would it be?
Ooh, oh man. Any acts from any
era, any time?
I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan. So I would have to say Bob Dylan. If I could, you know, have him open for me, obviously.
Yeah.
Man, I'd say Bob Dylan and really Tim Hawkins. Like, I don't want him to hear this, and he probably won't, but he's not only the best comedian, he is the best guitar player I've ever seen. And so he could do a whole tour of just songs, and it would be rocking. So, yeah, I mean, I've done one of those. I've toured with Tim forever, and so I feel like it's a cop-out. So if Tim didn't want to do it, then probably Tom Petty.
Okay.
Close second. I know everybody says Tim or Tom Petty, but yeah.
Well, and the amazing thing is that part of Tim's act includes some Bob Dylan stuff. So it would be kind of cool to see him do Bob Dylan to Bob Dylan.
Yeah. He knows I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan. And so he actually had written some songs where it really wasn't supposed to be Dylan. And then he changed it just for that because, you know, he knew. And then it worked. And so he incorporated that. And he's got some Tom Petty stuff too that he does as well. So, yeah. So really all I need is Hawkins. And I could get both of those guys, you know, their spirit in the room then.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the final question is, for anybody that either wants to venture into comedy, podcasting, or writing, since you're writing Average Boy, what would your wise counsel be for them in using their gifts for God's glory? Yeah,
don't do it. There's already enough competition out there. So yeah, go be a teacher, you know, do something noble. No, if I have to give advice, is write every day. That's the hardest part. Even if you don't feel funny, even if you don't feel inspired, sit down at your desk at least 15 minutes a day, stare at a blank page, stare at a blank cursor, you know, and just try to write. Because the hardest part about writing is sitting down and starting. And, you know, so there's so many times where I'll sit down and write and I don't feel funny. And I did this chapter 11 of the new Average Boy book. I'd finished this story arc and I was like, okay, I know I'm going to write about Thanksgiving and Christmas, but I don't really have anything to fit right in here. And I was like, and so I just started writing. Average Boy got on his bike, you know, just to start something. And I didn't even end up using that opening sentence, but just starting it, I finally got this and so far it's my favorite chapter of the book. But I didn't feel inspired, didn't feel like writing, but I sat down and just started writing. So that's my advice to people.
And it's very interesting that you actually, your favorite chapter was chapter 11, which very few people this year are really enjoying.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I'm going to probably enjoy that soon.
Yeah. Well, we hope not. But Bob, it's been an honor and a pleasure to spend some time with you. And I know that I join thousands and maybe millions of people praying that things open up and that we get to see you out on stage, a real stage, not a virtual stage, very soon. And we wish you and Sarah all the best with the podcast and happy, as this goes out, belated anniversary.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on, Dave.
Are you looking for a speaker for your next event? A guest pastor to fill in and give your staff a break? A moving testimony to share the hope found in Christ alone? For this and more, our host Dave Ebert is now taking bookings to share his testimony, his love of laughter, and the joy of the Lord with your audience. For information, contact booking@giftsforglory.com. Booking@gifts4glory.com. Booking@giftsforglory.com.